You know, um, Usually when you walk into a store to buy something beautiful, you just sort of assume the thing you're looking at is exactly what it appears to be.
Right. There's this baseline expectation of visual honesty.
Exactly. Like if you buy a diamond, it's a diamond. You look at a painting, it's paint on a canvas. What you see is what you get.
We implicitly trust our eyes, yeah. Especially with nature. We just assume a flower is, just a flower doing exactly what a flower is supposed to do.
But today, we're stepping into the world of high-end horticulture. And man, suddenly that visual honesty just goes completely out the window.
It really does. It's a whole landscape of botanical smoke and mirrors.
And that exact illusion is the heart of the source material we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We've got this fascinating journal entry simply titled Notes on Gardening, Part 893.
Yeah, written by a diarist named Ang. And I have to say, while Notes on Gardening sounds incredibly quaint and relaxing.
It sounds like a Sunday afternoon read.
Right. But what Ang actually uncovers in this entry is this massive tale of botanical deception, global plant economics, and the deeply ingrained psychology of collectors.
So we're taking you along with us on this seemingly everyday trip to a garden center to figure out what actually makes something valuable in nature, and really how easily our eyes and our wallets can be tricked.
It is the perfect case study in how biology essentially dictates human economics.
Let's set the scene here. So Aang is just wandering through a local garden center and suddenly stops dead in their tracks.
Just completely arrested by this one plant.
Yeah, they stumble upon what they describe as a real showstopper. It's this plant that looks like a massive, vibrant cascade of red petals. It just totally dominates the space.
Biologically, the scientific name is Mussaenda erythrophylla.
Okay, quite a mouthful.
It is, yeah. Though in the trade, it has a much more theatrical common name. They call it the Red Mussaenda, or the Red Ashanti blood.
Which is just a phenomenally metal name for a garden shrub. I mean, you hear red Ashanti blood and you expect something dramatic,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, absolutely. The plant commands attention before you even look at the price tag.
And that brings us to the sticker shock.
Yeah.
Because Aang walks up, entirely intrigued by this massive red display, asks about the price, and finds out this single plant will set you back about 1,500 Malaysian ringgit.
Which is a remarkably steep price for, one addition to a backyard garden.
I am still trying to wrap my head around 1,500 MYR for a shrub. Like, that is luxury goods territory.
It really is.
It's like walking into a regular everyday shoe store and finding a pair of sneakers priced like a high-end designer runway piece.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know, browsing a local weekend craft fair and seeing a painting priced like a recovered museum artifact.
That's a great way to put it.
So I have to ask you, what is driving the price of a plant up to luxury market levels for just a casual hobbyist?
Well, the price is the end result of a very long, rigid chain of biological and economic factors. But the very first link in that chain, the reason anyone would even consider paying that much is just the plant's visual appeal. And as Ang points out in the notes, that appeal is entirely based on a biological trick.
The botanical smoke and mirrors we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. When Ang looked really closely at this cascade of vibrant red, they noticed that those massive show-stopping parts, they aren't petals at all.
Wait, they aren't petals.
No, they are sepals.
Okay, hold on. For those of us who aren't botanists, what exactly is a sepal?
So in a typical plant, a sepal is that small, green, modified leaf that sits at the base of a flower. Its job is to protect the bud before it opens.
Oh, right, like the little green casing on a rosebud?
Yes. Perfect example. And once the flower blooms, the sepals usually just sort of tuck away underneath, barely noticeable.
They do their job and get out of the way.
Right. But the Red Mussaenda has evolutionarily hijacked its own anatomy. It has massively enlarged one or more of those sepals and flooded them with this brilliant red pigment.
So it is essentially a leaf doing a highly convincing Academy Award-winning impression of a luxurious petal.
It is pure mimicry. The true flowers of the Red Ashanti blood are entirely different structures.
Really? Where are they?
They are actually these tiny star-shaped yellow tubes hidden right in the center of all that red foliage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the massive red sepals are basically just a biological billboard. They exist solely to grab the attention of pollinators from, hundreds of yards away and guide them toward those tiny little yellow flowers in the center.
Wait, hold on. Let me just think about that. Why spend all that evolutionary energy turning a massive leaf bright red just to point to a tiny yellow flower?
It's a fair question.
I mean, why not just grow a bigger yellow flower to begin with? It seems like an incredibly elaborate deception for no reason.
Well, it all comes down to cellular infrastructure and biological efficiency. Growing a true petal is actually incredibly resource-intensive for a plant.
Really, more than a leaf.
Oh, absolutely. Petals don't photosynthesize well. They are essentially energy sinks. They require entirely different, highly specialized tissues that are fragile and have a very short lifespan.
Oh, I see.
Think about it. A petal blooms, it wilts a few days later, and then it just falls off.
Right, it's a very short-term, high-cost investment.
Exactly. Whereas a leaf, or modified leaf like a sepal, already possesses a super sturdy vascular system.
Because it's built like a normal leaf.
Yes. It has veins, it has stomata, it has structural integrity designed for longevity. It is built to weather storms and last for months.
That makes so much sense.
So by modifying a leaf and simply changing its chemical pigment to red, the plant finds this brilliant biological loophole. It creates a permanent, highly visible display that requires just a fraction of the metabolic upkeep of a massive, fragile petal.
Oh man, I love that. It's the difference between trying to build an entirely new, incredibly delicate $1 million LED billboard from scratch every single week
Yeah.
versus just slapping a fresh coat of neon red paint over a sturdy concrete highway sign that's already sitting right there.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. The plant is just using its existing highway sign.
And it works.
It works almost too well. I mean, it was designed over millennia to manipulate the visual processing of insects and birds, right? But it perfectly manipulates human attention in a garden center.
We are drawn to that massive display of color from across the parking lot, just like a pollinator.
We are just as susceptible to the billboard.
But, okay, that brings us back to Aang standing there, mesmerized by these fake petals, holding a price tag of 1,500 MYR. The deceptive beauty explains why we, want the plant.
Right.
But being pretty doesn't explain the economics of why it costs so much. There are lots of pretty plants that cost $10.
Very true. And this is where the biology of the Red Mussaenda directly creates a massive global economic bottleneck.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So Aang's notes explain that this perennial shrub is native to West Africa.
Okay.
Now, Aang lives in a tropical climate, and they note that the plant actually survives and grows perfectly well in their local weather.
Right. I mean, the temperature matches, the humidity matches. It clearly thrives there if it's sitting in the garden center looking that spectacular. So why isn't it growing in everyone's backyard?
Because survival and reproduction are two completely different physiological mechanisms for a plant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A mature plant can easily survive in a non-native environment, but reproducing, specifically, propagating from cuttings, requires highly specific environmental triggers that are entirely absent in Aang's region.
What kind of triggers are we talking about here?
Well, when a local nursery tries to propagate a plant, they usually take a cutting. They just snip off a branch and stick it in soil, hoping it will sprout adventitious roots.
Basically cloning it.
Exactly. But for a cutting to suddenly change its cellular programming from, hey, I am a branch, to, oh, wait, I need to grow roots now, it relies on specific cues.
Like what?
This particular cultivar of the red Ashanti blood might require, say, a specific diurnal temperature shift.
Meaning day and night temperatures.
Right. A sharp drop in temperature at night that you only find in its native West African habitat. That shift might be what triggers the rooting hormones.
Wow.
Or it might rely on specific symbiotic mycorrhizal fungi that are only present in West African soils to stimulate that cellular differentiation.
So you're saying the local nurseries in Aang's area are taking cuttings, putting them in the dirt, and the plant is just sitting there doing absolutely nothing.
It'll sit there, look perfectly healthy for a while, and then simply rot. It completely refuses to root. The local climate just lacks the biological keys to unlock its reproductive cycle.
Wow. That is basically a natural paywall.
A natural paywall is the exact reality of the situation. Because local nurseries simply cannot clone or breed the red Ashanti blood, they are physically incapable of creating a local supply.
So they have to bring them in from the outside.
Every single one of these plants has to be imported from specialized overseas growers who can somehow mimic those exact native conditions.
And the second you introduce international shipping to live agriculture, the cash register just starts ringing. I mean, I can't even imagine the logistical nightmare of shipping a living shrub across the globe.
It is an absolute economic gauntlet. You weren't just paying for the plant, you were paying for the survival rate.
What do you mean?
First, International agricultural laws require phytosanitary certificates.
Remember
You
down.
can't just put a pot of foreign dirt on an airplane.
Right, because of buds and stuff.
Exactly. That's how invasive pests and soil-borne pathogens spread.
So they have to ship it without the dirt.
Yes, they have to bare root the plants.
Oh, that sounds rough.
It is. They take this beautiful shrub, rip it out of its comfortable soil, wash the roots completely bare, treat them with heavy chemical fungicides, pack them in sterile sphagnum moss, and then put them in a dark cargo hold for days.
The physiological stress on the plant must be immense.
It's massive. A significant percentage of them will just die in transit.
Wow.
And then the ones that do survive arrive at the destination country and often have to sit in agricultural quarantine.
Where even more of them probably die.
Exactly. More die there. Finally, the local importer gets the surviving plants, repots them, and has to nurse them back to health in a greenhouse for months to reverse the shock of the journey.
Just so they look presentable enough to sell.
Right, before they even hit the garden center floor.
That is insane. So when Ang sees that 1,500 MYR price tag, they aren't paying 1,500 for a plant. They are subsidizing all the dead plants that didn't make it.
100%.
They are paying for the bare rooting, the international freight, the phytosanitary inspections, the quarantine holding fees, and the months of intensive greenhouse care required to trick this stubborn West African shrub into looking beautiful in a foreign country.
Yep. The plant's stubborn biological refusal to reproduce locally creates a state of total artificial scarcity.
Because nobody else can grow it.
Right. The importer holds a complete monopoly, and they just pass that entire logistical toll booth directly onto the consumer.
Which puts everyday garden enthusiasts like Ang in a really tough spot. I mean, you see this absolute masterpiece, you understand the visual trick, you want it for your garden, but the natural paywall just firmly prices you out.
It's frustrating.
What do you do when the ultimate prize is sitting right in front of you, but it's fundamentally out of reach?
You pivot. You find an alternative that satisfies the biological curiosity without the economic devastation.
And Ang's notes detail this pivot perfectly. Because of all these propagation bottlenecks with the Red Ashanti blood, local nurseries overwhelmingly prefer to cultivate and stock a different variety.
Right, the dwarf yellow Mussaenda, or Mussaenda luteola.
How is that one different?
Well, it is a much smaller variety, so it's far more manageable in size.
Yeah.
But crucially, it lacks the stubbornness of the red cultivar.
So it actually roots.
Yes, it propagates readily in Ang's local climate. Nurseries can take cuttings, grow thousands of them locally with zero import logistics, which means it is abundant and highly affordable.
And here is the kicker to Ang's diary entry. Ang actually already has the dwarf yellow Mussaenda in their own collection.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they explicitly reference previous log entries, Part 311 and Part 545, where they've spent time documenting it. So they are intimately familiar with this accessible sort of base model of the plant.
But seeing the massive Red Ashanti blood changes their entire perspective, doesn't it?
Totally.
Even though Ang explicitly acknowledges in the notes that the 1,500 MYR price point is definitely out of the question, the encounter doesn't leave them defeated.
Not at all.
It actually sparks a completely new desire to explore and collect other Mussaenda varieties.
I love this part of the notes because it captures the universal collector's dilemma so perfectly. It's exactly like being a car enthusiast.
Oh, how so?
Well, you might deeply, desperately want the multi-million-dollar limited edition Italian sports car, right?
Sure.
But you know you will never afford it. So you buy a really nice base model sedan that you can actually drive to work. But just walking into the showroom and seeing the sports car, it ignites this fire in you.
Right, the passion is still there.
Exactly. You go home and read the entire history of the manufacturer. You start collecting the vintage brochures. Maybe you buy a branded steering wheel for your desk.
I see what you mean. The unreachable apex item shifts your focus from simply owning a thing to the broader joy of curating a domain of knowledge.
Yes.
The Red Mussaenda becomes an aspirational anchor. It contextualizes the dwarf yellow variety Ang already owns, making it part of a larger, much more fascinating botanical family rather than just a standalone plant on a patio.
I want you, listening to this right now, to think about your own life and your own hobbies for a second. Have you ever experienced this accessibility pivot?
It happens in almost every hobby.
Right. Where the most elite, top-tier version of a thing is hidden behind this impenetrable paywall, but just knowing it exists makes you appreciate and collect the accessible versions even more.
Like rare first edition books.
Exactly. Or vintage mechanical watches. Or, in Eng's case, West African shrubs posing as giant red flowers.
What stands out in Eng's conclusion is just the sheer resilience of the collector's mindset.
Yeah, they don't give up.
The sticker shock of the Red Ashanti blood doesn't ruin the hobby. It actually expands the horizon of the hobby. Eng writes, I think it's time to explore the different Mussaenda varieties out there and maybe add a few more to the collection.
The unreachable plant eliminated a whole new path for their garden that they just wouldn't have considered otherwise.
Exactly.
So let's step back and look at what we've unpacked here today. We started with what seemed like a really simple, quiet diary entry, part 893, about an everyday trip to a garden center.
A very normal weekend activity.
But beneath that surface, we uncovered a masterclass in nature's ingenuity and economic reality. We found plants executing these brilliant evolutionary shortcuts, turning sturdy leaves into massive red fake petals, just to point pollinators to tiny yellow tubes.
And we explored the hidden cellular mechanics of propagation and how a plant's biological refusal to root outside its native soil creates a literal natural paywall.
Which is still blowing my mind, honestly.
Yeah. It's incredible. We saw how that single biological trait forces an incredibly stressful, expensive international shipping network, artificially driving the price of a backyard shrub to 1,500 MYR.
And finally, we saw how the human desire to collect, to categorize, and to appreciate beauty adapts when faced with that impenetrable economic barrier.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the architecture of a garden. Once you understand the biological infrastructure of sepals versus petals and the invisible international supply chain attached to every pot,
You start questioning every exotic plant you see.
you really do.
It makes you wonder how many layers of logistical and evolutionary history are sitting quietly on your own windowsill right now.
Probably more than you think.
Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. We've spent this entire deep dive talking about how visually arresting this red plant is and how its steep price tag is driven entirely by the fact that it stubbornly refuses to propagate locally.
Right.
But imagine for just a moment that tomorrow a random genetic mutation occurs in the Red Ashanti blood. Suddenly, it becomes as incredibly easy to clone and propagate locally as the dwarf yellow variety.
Oh, wow.
Local nurseries start churning them out by the thousands. The market just floods. The logistics of bare root international shipping vanish overnight, and the price drops from 1,500 MYR to just $3 or $4.
It would completely change the market.
You could find these massive red sepals at every local grocery store, gas station, and hardware store.
Like a common weed.
Right. If that happened, would we still find those massive red leaves quite as mesmerizing? Or is our human fascination, our deep appreciation for its beauty, inextricably linked to the rarity, the difficulty of the supply chain, and that luxury price tag?
Oh, man.
Is it really the plant we love, or is it just the thrill of standing in front of something that is incredibly hard to get?
That cuts right to the core of human psychology and the true nature of desire. It's a great question.
It is definitely something to think about the next time you are wandering through a garden center, eyeing a showstopper. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Stay curious, keep questioning what you see, and definitely take a much closer look at the flowers or the sepals in your own neighborhood. You never know what kind of elaborate biological billboard you might be staring at.